Hi, and welcome to Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness with your hosts Chris Noble and Bill Protzman. In today's episode, we're going to talk about 432 Hz tuning, its effects on the human body, and also the history of this tuning. Why do we tune instruments to different concert pitches? What is a concert pitch? Why does any of this matter? And how does it affect us into this day and age? We're going to go over many different areas regarding frequency healing, tuning, how to integrate 432 Hz tuning into your everyday life. We will go over the history of sound and frequency healing and all of the interesting innovations that have been forgotten but are being rediscovered in this very day and age. We'll be covering topics like that and much more, as always, in our wide-ranging conversation here on Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness. It's October.
May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I was just getting off the phone with a friend of mine back in Ontario, and he is a musician and a very ascended, conscious human who is, he's trying to incorporate a lot more 432 Hz tuning into his music. And so I thought maybe today, or at least to start the conversation, we could simply talk about tuning, like what kind of a difference, just something so simple like tuning your instruments. And what I recorded my first EP having shifted the concert pitch from 440 Hertz to 432 Hertz. And as you know, but I don't think most people, and honestly, I don't even think a lot of musicians really know that there are other concert pitches, right? So for the listeners, what is concert pitch? If you've ever listened to an orchestra and you hear them before the performance and they're all tuning their instruments, when you hear all that collective noise of the strings, they're actually tuning to an A note. They're tuning to a particular note that is a specific frequency that's been predetermined and standardized. And then everyone tunes to that. And then that's helpful because then we can use guitar tuners and tuning apps, and all those things are basically tuned into a concert pitch. And that pitch is 440 Hertz. So everyone's doing that. Pretty much 99% of the music you're listening to is tuned to that concert pitch. But there are other pitches, other frequencies like 432 or 440 and many others. And my last couple of years of experience tuning my music to 432 Hertz versus 440, and nothing changes for the people listening to. Like, my music doesn't change, the songwriting doesn't change. It just sounds a little lower in its tone. But man, from experience, I really find that I've sometimes done, I A/B it, like I'll contrast it and I'll play the same thing at 440. And then the same music at 432. 432, I get more people commenting like, wow, I really love the feeling of that. Like I just dropped into the music more. I was really captivated more by it. And then I felt myself kind of lost more in it and things like that. And my friend who I just got off the phone with, he's a performer back in Ottawa and Ontario. And he's saying like, dude, I was playing some shows this summer and he would A/B it just like me, where he would play 2 songs at normal tuning, and then he switches guitars and plays at 432 Hertz for a couple of others. Doesn't say a word to anyone else. And it's when he starts playing at 432, all of a sudden, people that are at the bar watching the hockey game or something like that, all of a sudden start paying attention to him, and they start dropping into his music. So he's had experience that really does do something. I've had experience that really says that this tuning does something. What have you experienced, Bill? Like, and then we can get into the science later, but like, have you experienced anything with that kind of tuning change?
I've only done that internal in the studio. I haven't actually done that performance-wise until very recently. The external performance stuff that I was doing all involved a real piano.
Right.
And getting a tuner to tune one of those things, is a couple $100 to change the whole instrument.
It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's a pain in the butt. But now with keyboards and stuff, so you can change at will, pretty much. You just dial it down. You could be 1 click, 2 clicks, whatever you like, and whole transposition can take place, which is really weird, man. If you're used to hearing something in a certain key and then you transpose it like using a guitar capo, it just feels weird when you play it. So your brain is going, no, that's not C anymore. So limited experience. Although Christmas or so of 2019, or maybe it was 2020. I don't remember right now. It's been such a crazy couple of years. I decided just to record some yoga stuff, yoga music. And I'd done that before at 440 using the keyboard, Tibetan bowls, which kind of don't matter, and native flutes. And I suspect that if you really got into it, you'd find that those ancient instruments are more 432-ish than they are 440-ish, right? There's so many overtones going on in a Tibetan bowl, if it's a good one, that the ear is probably not going to suss that out and really know, because they're just going to hear the ethereal nature of the instrument, right, is going to come through. So don't know. I could try playing along. I've got some like recorded stuff I could mess with, but personal experience, I'm encouraged. I mean, I'd love to try it out. I've been sitting out in Balboa Park here in San Diego with a keyboard and a battery and a speaker every Saturday while my wife teaches art class. And I thought, hey, maybe I'll try dialing it down as you're talking and see what 432 does using the same kind of setup and audience, basically.
I highly recommend it. And that also, just on a side note, sounds so soothing, that just that imagery of you playing your keyboard.
Yeah, pretty cool.
With your wife doing the artwork. I actually passed by a group doing something similar here in Vancouver, and I'm like, wow. I mean, that sounds just fantastic. But give it a try and see how people respond. I mean, it's not maybe across the board, but I really do find it fascinating of how such a simple transposition and tuning change can make such a massive difference on the exact same piece of music.
Yeah.
And, the one thing I can get into with the science of that is, obviously we know from quantum mechanics, everything is in a state of vibration. All the cells in our body, everything that makes up matter is in a state of vibration. And if you look into the work of the, I always forget, and I blank on the famous Japanese scientist who did the brilliant work on the water.
Ice crystals? Yeah.
Yeah.
What is his name? I'll go find out.
Keep talking. Thank you. Yeah, you do that and I'll keep talking here. So this amazing Japanese scientist did incredible research for decades actually on how water responds to emotion and how it responds to different frequencies. And he did test 432 hertz under the microscope versus 440. And you can, there's probably memes and stuff now that go around showing this contrast. But if you look at the cells or the water crystals from 440 and then compare them to 432, the 432 crystals are far more crystalline, more geometric, more symmetrical, and they look healthier from a very intuitive and kind of
they're more beautiful.
They look beautiful. They look like snowflakes. They look like gorgeous, crystalline structures. 440 is not so symmetrical, and it's not so it's not so beautiful. It looks a little muddy sometimes, and it's a little uneven. And you're like, that's affecting every cell in your body is going to start to look and resemble to that shape a bit. So it actually does make sense on a physiological level. If you're changing the tuning to resonate with the cells in your body, it makes sense that if you're going to a more therapeutic tuning, it's going to have more therapeutic outcomes.
So why 432? I mean, let's talk about this just a bit for people who don't know. I mean, and I'm even curious about this because there are frequencies that are very meaningful that are slightly off, like 432 to 440 isn't that far, but why 432?
Well, it's a question I've been asking for a long, long time, and I definitely won't pretend to have the ultimate answer for this one. I think for me, it started and it came from research into ancient civilizations. For example, the Great Pyramid that we've talked about previously. I've had some great experiences there in Egypt and in the Great Pyramid. And the Great Pyramid has 432 all over it. And what I mean by that is when you measure the Great Pyramid, it was built with a measurement system called the Royal Cubit. The Royal Cubit is a very, very ancient form of measurement that goes back to ancient Egypt and probably beyond that. And I think it actually lines up with the metrics. I was going to say our metric system. You guys don't have the metric system, but most other countries do. And it does match up, I believe, relatively close to the metric system by sheer coincidence. Anyway, that's not really important. The important thing is that the Great Pyramid has, when you measure it out by the cubit and you start to get all the numbers and you start to get all the ratios and all the statistics, of what makes up this building, the structure, it all comes back to 432 in terms of a ratio that continually pops up. And then they measure the distance from Earth to the moon. And it's roughly, not roughly, but it's like it's something like 432 million kilometers. And then the distance, and these are, I'm definitely not doing the right numbers, FYI. Like, this is not the exact amount of zeros, but the core beginning numbers to these distances are always 432. And it could be 432 million, billion, 1,000, whatever it is. So the distance from the Earth to the sun is 432 billion kilometers versus 432 million to the moon and back to the Earth. And then the Great Pyramid itself is built exactly to scale the exact same size as planet Earth, which has this ratio of 432 again. So, I mean, that alone just got my curiosity going. And then where it's gone from there as to why I use it is because of my experience where I could see it really helping people. And then looking into the research of the gentleman that you researched, Marasumoto, I believe, is the Japanese guy, scientist. And his work also really started to convince me that, you know, look, if I change the tuning, I might be able to help people on a physiological level with the music too. So that's kind of what started it. But do I have all the answers there? No, like, this is an evolving science and art form.
So this magic number, is it something that you arrive at mathematically, or is it something that is more fundamental, like ancient Egyptians are sitting around figuring out what pitch is the most beautiful one or something like that, and they decide, oh, well, this is the pitch, and it turns out to be 432 hertz?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, your guess is as good as mine at this point. I really don't know, because it comes back into our history time and time again. You know, the music of the spheres. Yeah. And you know, people like in the ancient Greeks were talking about the mathematical perfection of certain types of music, and then that would lead into their architecture, which is, you know, uses sacred geometry. Sacred geometry has similar ties to these sacred numbers. Nikola Tesla would always talk about the power of 3, 6, and 9. And if you look at the 432, well, 4 plus 3 plus 2 equals 9. And so, you know, that number also has, you know, these numerological powers, if you want to call them that. So it's interesting, Bill. Like, I don't know, like, have you heard, even just like through the grapevine and whatnot, like what other people talk about when they refer to 432?
I'm sort of in the classical world, and there are recordings, like whole recordings made at that pitch, just because, you know, some producer decided they wanted to do that. I haven't done the A/B comparison on that kind of thing, but I've done the guitar comparison. There's YouTube videos you can go and watch the same performer play the same piece in two different tunings, 440 and 432. Mm-hmm. And I can tell a difference, but I can't tell you what it is. Is the way of saying it. I think we talked about this at one point, maybe a couple of months ago, before we were recording episodes. And I know that I prefer to play an A flat, 432, versus A, 440. And if you had an ancient guitar, theoretically, if you had an ancient guitar, which is tuned around an A chord, you would actually be tuning around an A flat chord in the 440 world. So there's a resonance around certain fundamental, like, acoustic instruments that I think probably lays in better in 432, not only for the instrument, but for the person listening to it. I don't know that for a fact, but my personal preference is 432. And you know, after getting involved with some of the dipping the toe in the pool, you know, and saying, oh, what's this 432 thing all about? It made sense to me. I just feel better in A flat, right? And the flat keys, basically. So everything is shifted in that direction for me. Why? I don't know. And certainly when a lot of that stuff was composed, a lot of that classical music stuff was composed, there was a certain amount of disagreement about what the concert hertz should be. Wasn't it standardized in the early 1900s when somebody chose 440?
Around World War II, from what I heard.
Okay. So prior to that time, I don't know, A flat would have probably sounded like G.
Or A. I mean, it depends on where you are.
Well, that's true too, because in Europe it could have been different, right?
I've heard 444 hertz is another interesting concert pitch, right?
So people just sort of randomly chose, if you're in Italy, this is what they use. Or even if you're in Rome, it's different than if you're in Sicily. I don't know.
Just like the food. Just like the food, right?
Just like the food, right? Yes.
Right. Why can't music be as flavorful?
Exactly. And I wonder now, thinking about this, so worldwide, a guitar player these days can go any place and pretty much play in tune with anything that happens. But think about all the places in the world where the guitar is sort of fundamental, like all over South America, a good part of Spain. They have similar instruments in the Middle East. Who decides, right? And is it a matter of just what feels good? Guy sits down with an oud one day and says, "Hey, this is how I'm going to tune today." Everybody else tunes around him, and off you go. But there are instruments that can't be tuned. Like if you're playing along with a wooden flute, like our modern harmonica, you get one in every key. But if you're playing along with a wooden flute, I mean, how do you know? Do you tune to the flute? Or it's like somebody had to decide. Some guru had to say, no, this is the pitch, right? And now,
what I find interesting about that, Bill, you brought that up because like I've heard some ancient instruments, and I've had the pleasure of sometimes being able to play my own piano to these instruments. And one of the other ones, like you mentioned, Tibetan singing bowls and crystal singing bowls. Yeah. And I have quite a few friends now who are all sound therapists, sound healers. And first of all, playing music over top of those sounds is one of the most fun things ever.
Oh, isn't it great? I love it.
Oh my God. And I love improvising kind of classical, very light, angelic, sort of melodies and whatnot over top of the bowls, because it's just ethereal and euphoric, and it feels really, really good. But anyway, I noticed when I was recording my first EP, I actually put a crystal bowl in one of my dance songs, subtly, in like the bridge and another kind of part of one of the songs. And when I was going through the recording process, because my album was all tuned to 432 hertz, I had to kind of figure out, like, well, what am I going to do with the bowl? I mean, it's easy enough to record something and then actually tune it afterwards. But it's not the same. Like if you're not tuning it from the core source of the sound, it's going to be a little different. It's still probably better. But anyway, I can't tune a crystal bowl. It's just built the way it is, right? Like you mentioned, flute. But I found when I was doing the recording, I didn't need to shift the pitch. It was already kind of working at 432.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That's interesting.
I don't know anything about tuning except that it's good when it's tuned. But all of those crazy things that we do to bend the pitch at either end of the scale, the lower and the higher, and when did they come up with equal temperament tuning? The scales that you can hear out there, and there's YouTube videos, anybody can go and find them. Hearing those different kinds of scales presented boggles the mind. And there are a bunch of them, microtuning kind of stuff and all of that. But I suspect that the Tibetan bowls, maybe in the crystal bowls, work in a way that is broader, so that they're not about like hitting the melody note exactly in the center, right? You can bend them and they still work. And that for me is fantastic. I think the human ear is really, if we ever get around to studying how it works, like at a real deep level, we'll get to some insight on this. But it's very forgiving, the human ear.
It is. And you just made me think of, with like classical Indian music, for example, their scales are on a whole other level because they usually can insert 3 notes where we have 1 note, where we're going to go from an interval, which, we call moving up 1 note, a semitone. Well, within that 1 note, when you're moving up from a C to a C sharp in classical Indian, that as far as I know, and I'm certainly not very well educated in that, just from what I've learned, is you can squeeze about 3 more notes in that one semitone when it comes
microtones. Yeah,
that's the microtones. Okay, then that's what. Okay, yeah. So like when you listen to some of that music, does it not have a spiritual effect on you in certain ways? Maybe because they're in between these frequencies, and they're. Man, I'm falling with the language right now. I can't.
Even. Well, it's not popular music, but there are people who are getting there in pop music who can sing the microtones, and it sounds so cool when it's intentional. I wish I could come up with a list of them. Just top of my head, I can't. But I like that we're playing with that now. and that wherever the source, maybe it's classical Indian music, is bleeding over now into something else that the Western ear is becoming interested in. And hearing those microtones, and they're done with such intent that it sounds right, even though it could be perceived as like out jazz or something. It just sounds right. And yes, more spiritual. So people are like taking the melody and shifting it just a bit to expand our, I don't know, it's not our mind, expand our soul experience of the thing in a way. And I think that's an important invitation. It's probably existed in Indian music for so long people don't even know anymore, but it's new to Westerners. So we're consuming it for the first time and sort of en masse, and finding a new way of being able to dig into music that way. I wouldn't recommend anybody go out and sing microtones around a popular tune. But if you're a jazz improviser and you've got the chops, I mean, vocally, that must be amazing to do. Right?
It must be, like, I think, another really incredible thing about looking into the ancient Indian, music and culture is it goes back so far. If you look at the ancient Vedic texts, and they talk about how a lot of crazy things actually they talk about, but they one of them is how the music really and sound were used as the main source of medicine back in the ancient times. And we kind of gloss over that or straight up ignore it now, but ironically we're rediscovering a lot of these modalities in science now, and we've talked about some of these in the past, but this sound and frequency healing, I guarantee you this is a lost form of medicine that we had maybe globally, because you can find it in ancient Chinese as well, like like in all that culture as well, India and certain tribes, even in Africa. I mean, how many would do healing shamanic ceremonies with drumming and with other sounds, chanting, things of that nature, and then building cathedrals or buildings that would facilitate even more of the sound and even more of the sonics and acoustics to help elevate and heal people even more. And we lost that in the last, not even that long, really, because even in like the 1800s, people were still at least going to church and having big sing-alongs. And regardless if you're religious or not, it's those very, very spiritual and euphoric experiences when you're in a cathedral type environment and singing with more than 3 people.
Yeah,
it's incredible, and I know you can speak to that a lot, Bill. Like it's a feeling.
It's such an incredible feeling.
And that kind of feeling, like if we've been deprived of that in the 21st century and most of the 20th century, you start to see how stressed we are and anxious we are and all the cancers that are popping up everywhere and only increasing. And you kind of wonder, you're like, maybe this modern medicine thing needs to get a bit of reapproached and incorporate more of the frequency, more of the non-pill, non-prescription based or pill prescription based medicine, where we're going a different route.
Yeah, headed away from. But something that's interesting to me, there's a lot of research right now, of course, in music, but there's a lot of vibrational research, right? And vibration is sort of sound. The universe is a vibratory place. People are starting to appreciate what that really means. And notions like the music of the spheres have come back to us when we hear sounds of the wind on Mars, or the sound of the sun, or like there's this new sort of interest in the sound of where we live. That's all around us. Forest bathing. What else have we talked about? There's so many things going on, and I'm curious if there is. How do I say this? The knowledge is pretty esoteric still, but I wonder if it was secret on purpose, or would it have been something that an ancient Egyptian would have known? When they walked into the pyramid. I'm pretty sure that folks who walked into like the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris would not have any idea at all about the science of what's happening inside that place. I mean, this is the Middle Ages, but maybe there was some secret knowledge that made the architectural sort of specifications of that place what they are on purpose. And isn't Notre Dame the place that's sort of bent? It's not like a straight line from one end of the nave to the, what do they call it? The apse.
There's never full on, like it's always ratios in sacred geometry. Right.
Yeah.
So it's never like a full rectangle. It would be a smaller square with a longer rectangle, and they create these spiral. When you trace them out, they create that spiral pattern every time, the same spiral you see in the galaxy.
Fibonacci sequence or whatever.
Exactly, a Fibonacci sequence. It's the mathematics of organic growth that's found all over the universe. So you're building mathematically to the same ratio that creation builds everything else. So when you build a structure, because we build, especially nowadays, it's cost effective and cheap and fast to put up, and yeah, it might break down in 10 years, but who cares? We'll be millionaires by then. I mean, that's kind of how we build right now.
Yeah.
And that was not how we used to always build. There used to be a lot more intention with what was going on. And I think what happened is in the dark ages, which we talk about in history, where we just don't know what was going on. But I say the dark ages in terms of human consciousness, where the last couple thousand years, I would say, we definitely did a decline. Because if you look in ancient Chinese and ancient Indian, just as an example, or like the Mayans, Aztec, I mean, they were, a lot of what we learn about is their warring and barbaric times. But when you can go deeper into their history, you'll find that there was such universal wisdom and knowledge that was shared by cultures across continents that were supposedly disconnected and had no way of literally creating the same types of pyramids. They'd build the same. Ideas of mummification and of the afterlife were all very common. Ideas of a great flood that reset humanity was very common, and a bunch of other things. And so when you look at those ancient people and what they were doing with how they built things, I think they had more public knowledge back then that then started to come into a period of darkness on a consciousness level, where it became dangerous to continue to have these pieces of wisdom that ultimately liberate and uplift humanity. And because it teaches you of the universe and God power that we have inside of ourselves. And so, of course, that means we're not reliant on external forces that want to control us. Like, the church and the dark ages and things like that were much more oppressive. So yeah, things I've heard, like the Knights Templar, for example, seem to be one secretive group that kept this knowledge and were a part of the building of the ancient Gothic cathedrals that we find in the Mediterranean and stuff like that. And then the Gothic cathedrals were basically taking the remnant energy or information of ancient Egypt and other pyramid cultures and bringing that into the cathedrals. And then now to this day, there are sometimes churches, even in North America and other places, that go back to that old tradition of building with sacred geometry. And if you go into any of them, no matter what walk of life you are, you walk into any cathedral that's got sacred geometry in its stained glass and in its architecture, and you're always like, wow. That's just the reaction is wow.
It's always, like the 432 reaction.
It's actually, it's a good point.
Just
it's always like
large.
It feels good. It just, you feel better. So I don't know.
We need to feel better. This is, there's got to be studies on this stuff out there, right? I mean, I hate to tell people to go and do their own research, but there's probably research that supports this.
Yes.
That's thousands of years old, as there is with most of things like music and art that are thousands of years old. There's always something spiritual behind them somewhere. Like the whatever those cave drawings you see from way back in the day where people have mushrooms and there's some through line here that's much bigger than 432 or sacred geometry. There's something else that we're striving for, I think. And these are sort of manifestations of it. Yeah, 432 hertz better than 440 because it's more spiritual. Okay, so that's a big mouthful, but maybe that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
And who cares about the reasons why? Just go with it, right?
Just go with it. And I think it's this like we're connecting on consciousness. I mean, that's like the kind of common thread here is that what did all these things do? It basically just aligns you with who you are. And that's it. So, sometimes illness and disease and all these things are actually just vibrational conditions that are actually a lot of the time, and cancers are also them too, where they're based off of deep emotional traumas or deep psychological issues that are completely repressed, never dealt with, or even shamed for being there. And so they get so deeply repressed that physically they'll manifest into different things like cancers, tumors, heart problems. I mean, you name it, right? And so these vibrational therapies, these sound healing and things like that, really, like, they can cut through so much of this trauma and disease and illness in such a quick amount of time, because they're bypassing so much and just going straight to your cells and vibrating your cells into a more harmonious vibration, which literally could make all the difference between you having something as severe as cancer and not. Because this is actually a great segue into, and I think you've seen some of these works where you've seen cells vibrated, cancer cells vibrated by sound and frequency. Have you seen some of the stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it was when we were talking 40 hertz a while ago now, and I went off and started just looking for these things. And there's a few TED Talks now out there. Somebody started a company that's based on using frequency to, it doesn't actually kill cancer cells, but it kills something that's like the precursor. And as that thing dies, it's better than chemotherapy. As that thing dies, the cancer has nothing to feed on, so it dies as well. And that's fascinating stuff. And all by playing a sound that you can't hear.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But that's what is that called when the singers break the glass by singing the same note that the glass,
resonant frequency.
Yeah,
resonant frequency.
Yeah. So the frequency is found to resonate. Some guy did a whole bunch of research, like micro research, frequency up by what he'd use 1 or 2 hertz, just every step through every frequency to see what would happen. And fortunately, we've done that work. Now we know exactly what frequencies to pick, to go in there and get them, whatever it is we're after. I suppose that there's positive effects to that too. Like if you wanted to stimulate the regrowth of tissue, there'd probably be a frequency for that. Or I don't know, fix your hearing or your eyesight. I mean, LASIK is cool, right? But maybe there's something else, right, that we could use here. I'm just spitballing on this stuff, but why not, right?
Why not? I mean, if you think about it, though, even LASIK, I mean, that's laser, and laser is light. It's concentrated light. And what is light? Light is frequency that we pick up with our eyeballs, but it's still frequency. It's still part of a frequency spectrum, because everything is frequency. So, we call sound only because it's from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, which is what our ears hear, and then we call frequency that we see, call it light. But it's all frequency. So, you know what I mean? Like if you're shifting anything, you're going to affect things. If you're specifically putting out very particular frequencies, they will affect something. And it's a really interesting rabbit hole if anyone's interested in going down. It's a bit more conspiratorial, but it is fascinating. If you look into Royal Raymond Rife, and he's an early 1900s, very, very incredibly intelligent medical doctor, scientist, and inventor of the Rife microscope.
Microscope.
The opposite of that, the very small, not the space. And he was able to go into the cellular structure more than anyone else at the time. And he started to find resonant frequencies to all these different cells of different diseases, illnesses, and he created that whole book. And I have a friend of mine who there's a museum still in the States somewhere that has this book. Have you heard of it by any chance?
I have. I've heard of Rife frequencies. Haven't heard of the museum. I suspect there's some sort of an archive. So yes, hooray! At least they haven't destroyed all that, right?
They destroyed the microscope.
They destroyed and didn't they run him out of the States? I mean, he had to.
Did he even survive it? I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
I don't even know if he got out of it with his life, because
highly controversial. Strangely controversial. To me, it just seems weird that we would do something like that to a scientist.
Yes, but I mean, again, without going too far down it, I mean, if you look at Big Pharma and their initiatives, I mean, it completely destroys their business plan, like completely. Yeah. And they have trillions and trillions of dollars to make here. So that would be one pretty big motivator for them to do that. But the nice thing is that I'm pretty sure his book is still around. And obviously his research has permeated and resonated and continued to go, and people still refer to things as Rife frequencies, because he was the first person, or he was the first person to rediscover these things.
A veteran that I know is playing with a Rife frequency machine right now, related to health issues that he has.
Okay.
And I'm really curious to see how it's going to go for him. I'll keep you posted if we get any.
But what does that look like, Bill? Have you seen the machine? Do you know what that looks like?
He held it up over Zoom, and it looks like a small gray box with a handle. Okay. And he didn't open it up and show anything, but it does connect to your computer, so you can control it with software. And that seems like a pretty good idea to me.
I just Googled it here as we're looking, and wow, this looks amazing. This looks really cool. Yeah, so it's just a device, looks like a little computer device. And wow, that's really interesting. I just, and as I Googled this, of course, there's an image that popped up with um, how did Royal Raymond Rife die, and accident or conspiracy. And there was an actual newspaper article, and I do remember this, where they actually they gathered a whole bunch of the world's leading scientists. I think people like Einstein and Tesla were invited to this, and were there, and there was a photo of it, and it was a celebration of the end of disease.
Wow.
And so they were celebrating this because of his discoveries, and they're like, wow, I mean, this, like, anything you got, we'll find a frequency for it, and we're good.
Yeah.
And then a week later, his laboratory is completely destroyed. All of his equipment's gone. And once again, I can't remember, but I think he may have had an accident, quote unquote, within that same week. And unfortunately he's no longer with us. And anyway, it's interesting.
Didn't similar circumstances around Nikola Tesla's destruction?
Well, why are we never taught about the greatest scientists in the 20th and 19th century?
Exactly. We hear all about the uranium folks and the Manhattan Project and all of that, but we hear nothing about Tesla.
More patents than pretty much any other scientist in history. Our whole electrical grid we wouldn't have without him. Every time you plug something in the wall, we have him to thank for that. Not just Edison, because Edison was hell-bent on ending Tesla. Yep. And still couldn't, because Tesla was just too damn brilliant. But why don't we learn about him? I think one of the main reasons is because he wanted to give us free energy, and he wanted to give us free energy so early on. The Tesla Tower down in Colorado Springs was his invention of creating wireless electrical energy. I mean, it's even referenced in many, many Hollywood films at this point, and it's filled with mystery because it got built, and then JP Morgan was like, wait a minute, we can't you're going to destroy the oil industry, and we really can't tap free energy. Like, how do we make money and profit? So they kiboshed it. And because Tesla, I think, had a much bigger mission on this planet, which was to bring peace and harmony to the world. Yeah. In a time where that is not the current thought for the powers that be. That's why he was snuffed out and driven into obscurity. And he was driven into old age and obscurity, into his hotel room, which, when he passed away in his hotel room in New York City, I think the CIA and FBI were the first on the scene. And about 60% of his things, of Nikola Tesla's journals and all of his work, all of that's been confiscated. It's still top secret. It's still, seriously? Yes, it is still to this. That's how advanced his stuff was. He was going into technologies that only today we might be getting into. Like, he would talk about time travel and portal tech. I mean, so advanced, and the CIA, thankfully, not thankfully, has most of his stuff now. So we're like, I don't know if we'll ever find out about that.
At least we know where it is.
Yeah,
but other inventors, other inventors, and even hobbyists have figured out how to do some of that stuff just on their own. I saw some video. You know how you're reading through the news, and there's a thing that says, free energy, blah blah blah. Click here, and there's a big webinar that lasts 45 minutes, and you find out you can buy the how-to kit for $49 when you're done. Yeah. That kind of thing. But hooray, right? More of that, please. Because we're in a place where we're so handcuffed by medical technology, by energy technology, by the computer world that we live in, plain old technology. Unless it makes a buck, it doesn't see the light of day, which is really weird to me, because there's so many things that we need there, where there are really great ideas that are out there, like this whole thing about sound healing. Yeah. It's ancient. Why aren't we doing more of it? Why aren't people teaching each other to do this? And here in the West, anyway, it's still sort of it's sidelined. I mean, we have, what do they call it? Alternative therapies. There's medical words that allow us to show up as music therapists or whatever, and participate in a clinical
Alternative
situation.
medicine, I think.
Yeah. But it isn't the same. I mean, if these are tools that everybody can use, like having electricity in your home, why should that be a regulatory issue? Electricity just makes life better for many people. Why wouldn't we want life to be better for many people? Why would we deny that to people who would otherwise thrive if they had a little heat and light? It just seems crazy to me, especially if it could be free.
It is.
And by the way, hey, big susceptibility, because look at our dependence on medical technology now. We can't even agree on what works for COVID.
Yeah.
Let alone terrorist susceptibility of the electrical grid.
Yeah.
It wouldn't take much to take out, pretty large chunk of North America for a good period of time.
Well, and forget the electric. I forget like it being even a terrorist thing. Like we experienced a solar flare back in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
That wiped out all the telegram stations at the time. But luckily, because it was still mid to late 1800s, there wasn't too much electricity and too much of a grid at that point in history. Of course, fast forward to now, and it would be catastrophic if a solar flare like that were to occur today. Well, that only happened less than 200 years ago. I mean, that's a blip in terms of time and space and the Earth's timeline. I mean, so the likelihood of that happening, not to be doom and gloom and to freak people out, because I don't really like doing that either, but it is important to also just recognize, like, we're in a very fragile position here. And it actually makes a lot of economic and safety and health sense to get off this grid and get independent with our power.
Yeah.
And so again, these technologies that, are apparently have been around for so long. I mean, these are things that we need just for the survival of our species, really, because it's not sustainable. The way we live is just in no way sustainable.
Yeah, look, a hurricane comes along and people are out electricity for a week. Why is that in the world that we live in now, right? We can do better than that. And then there's places like Haiti where we must do better than that, because you just can't afford a population to be that decimated. Just comparing the difference between an earthquake in Haiti and an earthquake in Oakland. Remember the big one that collapsed the freeways and all that? It was terrible. But it wasn't several million people that were all of a sudden without food, water, shelter, warmth. It's just it's weird to me that we can live in a world like this where we don't do a better job for other people. So I talked to this futurist on the podcast that I co-host, and it was talking about AI. And this is a medical doctor who's also a poet, and his assistant who's also a accomplished musician. And they're up in Edmonton, and we're talking about AI, and the big scary thing about AI is it's going to take over the world, right? Everything's AI is going to take over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And his response was, well, it ought to, because look at what the mess we've made. But there's a humane aspect to this, right? So if artificial intelligence has all the information, it decides, hey, it's probably better to do electricity a la Tesla than it is to do it a la Westinghouse. Isn't that a plus for humanity as a whole, right?
And the planet?
And the planet. I mean, just think about it. And maybe we need AI to be able to say that to all the techno lovers out there so that they'll get it. Or to all of the I hate to put words on it, but to all of the greed. If you were to say, hey, greed, that's not good for everybody. Stop. Here's the alternative. Now, probably a lot of people wouldn't go along with that, but some would. And if it became an election issue, more would. But I'm thinking too hopefully here, because I doubt that AI is ever going to influence politics the way it needs to.
Well, who knows though? Who knows, Bill? I mean, we're seeing our whole world shifting in a way, and to a degree we've never ever would have guessed. I think I certainly couldn't have. So if I've learned anything over the last 2 years, it's that anything truly is possible, on the negative and the positive.
Yeah, it can go either way, right?
It can really go either way, and it comes back to like the intention of the collective and us, and like where we want to see it go. And one of the things I've heard about AI that I find fascinating is it's about the consciousness behind AI and who's creating AI, humans. So
right.
It's how we're thinking and how we're feeling and going through life that is ultimately going to be. Let's think about it this way. If we're continuing our warring ways, our divisive ways, our very violent and abusive ways that we have in the past, and I know we're not, because we're already shifting out of that. And I don't see it as our future at all. But as at the rate we're going currently and in the past, that is how we usually would go through life and things, was power domination, etc. And AI would learn that. That's what it would be learning, is that way of life. But if we shift it and take it into a more loving and inclusive, or and collective and community based, collaborative environment, then AI becomes that. AI becomes that. It becomes something that, like you said, it actually would be extremely helpful for us, because it would point out all these amazing solutions. Because there's a lot of things going on right now where if you just looked at it actually on a piece of paper from statistics alone, with no politics, no religion, no other stuff behind it, it would actually be quite obvious what we need to be doing, I feel.
Right. I agree.
Like, you look at what we're doing, you're like, well, I could tell you what we shouldn't be doing, which is pretty much everything right now.
True. Like, if you could core dump into AI all of human history, the weight of it would be on what might make the news, right?
Yes.
But there would also be in that human history things like the fundamental goodness of humankind would be in there. It might be something that's covered over by a lot of history, but it would be in there. And to be completely hands off about it, just load it all into AI and let AI make some choices. I suspect that we'd find out that things like sound healing and the whole power grid, all of the infrastructure stuff would just make more sense in a very compelling way. I occasionally have this argument about healthcare because, when you're in the music business, you bump up against healthcare frequently. And it just makes sense that having more healthy people is a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, hello. And if it's too expensive to do it one way and it's less expensive to do it another way, why are we continuing to choose the expensive way? I mean, that's not even an AI question. It's just like a bonehead logic kind of a question, right? So how much does a cancer treatment cost? I mean, seriously, you got chemo, whatever, it's 6 figures and up. I mean, I don't know. And that's in both of our economies, both in America and in Canada. That's a huge impact on the economy. For whatever reason, somebody pays for that, right? And it's a lot. And there are a lot of people with cancer. And so the ending cancer is a good thing. But how about beginning health? How much would it cost to begin health? And if the cancer treatment could be done using frequency, right, that's more effective and costs almost nothing, why would that not be a good choice? I mean, it just, from an economic standpoint.
At the very least, to give it some serious thought and experimentation, come back with some peer-reviewed science, like give me all the facts and information. If you can come back and tell me that it's all hogwash and it won't work and our chemo meds are better, which obviously I don't believe for a second. However, if the science came back and the science was saying, well, Chris, statistically speaking, the chemo that we've got is still better than this frequency, then I would be like, okay, then I rest my case, and then you're absolutely right. But I just want to see, the thing is we just haven't got a lot of science to show this still, and there's so much for the funded pharmaceutical side of things. We just don't have the same science to back up the alternative, the other alternatives that are out there. But like you were saying, like, doesn't it make sense to at least experiment with those and to trial and error and see, like, well, couldn't we
show us what's up?
Better way?
The people who are on the frequency for cancer kind of thing are the leading edge. And I am really actually surprised that they're that far along. There's an actual business that does this, because the agents of suppression, be whatever they may be, are vastly more well-funded and eager to keep their profits going. And, I imagine that treating cancer with frequency is profitable too. It's just not profitable in the way that it would be if you had a lock on cancer medicine or cancer research or cancer. I mean, cancer is a big deal, right? A lot of people would lose their jobs if you could cure it suddenly.
I mean, look at cancer charities. They are huge.
And they do amazing work, right?
Yeah.
They've made all this awareness where we didn't have it before. But getting down to it and actually fixing something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, suppose that we decided somehow we could pull the lever and everyone in the world would now suddenly tune to 432 hertz. And we were able to measure the effect of that globally. I think the statistics, the metrics would be compelling.
I think so too, and I would love to see that. This is why there's conspiracies as to why was the frequency standardized during World War II, and
Right.
apparently this idea did potentially come from Germany at the time. And they were using, I mean, they were masters at propaganda, as we all know. And one of the ways, it wasn't just the TV and the news propaganda, and the posters, but it was the music. They used music to keep people in fear and to keep them more in a state of compliance, so that they're easier to dominate and to make them do whatever you want them to do. And so you do have to wonder, like, well, just the tuning of everyone around the planet is listening to music almost every single day. Those frequencies are coming at people all over the place, shopping malls, work offices, you name it, back and home, wherever it is. Like, that music's coming out of the radio, coming out of speakers, and it's at that particular frequency. If you shifted that globally, like you said, to a much more therapeutic and healing frequency that we know is in 432 hertz, wow, that alone could make a huge impact. I mean, like, you get statistics sometimes of monks who come over to Washington, D.C. and meditate for a week, and you see crime rates plummet during that 1 week. And all they did was meditate. They didn't go out and stop crime. They didn't go out with police and hold up more people, arrest more people and solve it that way. No, they came and they meditated. So, I mean, that's still on something more frequency and vibrational. And what if you tuned music to 432 globally? Oh my God, what a cool experiment.
Wouldn't that be cool? And, I get it. If you're a symphony and all of a sudden you're going to go back and re-record all of the recordings that you made.
It's crazy. You're not going to do
it. But, I mean, maybe you could do something, but go for it, right? Why stop?
Moving forward, like all the new music you start to do, just start doing new stuff. Like, try that frequency now for a couple of new albums. Give it a go. See what happens.
I'd love to see if on the score, the composers that are writing these days have written A equals 432. I'd be curious. Anybody who's listening out there, if you know.
Yeah, I would
write
love
in
to
and
see.
tell us.
Please do. What I would love to see is, like, where is 432 being used outside of, the obvious, which is like this therapeutic music, meditation kind of, community. Yep. Outside of that, where else is it being used, And is some classical music, I know, because in classical, that's the genre I continuously hear where they do sometimes alter the concert pitch for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And why is it that it's always classical music that gets played in the gardens and in all the green spaces where they statistically show this so much, that the plants have like 4x, 4 times more growth, health, etc., listening to classical music? I don't know.
So do you have up your way places like 7-Eleven and McDonald's that are playing music outside?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't paid any attention, but I'm guessing it's probably still 440. The intention here is to keep people moving so that you don't have homeless encampments in front of your 7-Eleven. And so there's one just down the street from us that's always playing opera, which, is the last thing you want. The last thing I would want to hear, actually, if I was stopping to pick up, a gallon of milk or something, or buy cigarettes, or right, you've got Pavarotti, and not that I love Pavarotti. It's just that's more like cafe music for me than 7-Eleven music for me.
Yes,
but I wonder if the change from 440 to 432 in those isolated sort of places might have a different effect on whatever the effect is that they're after, keeping people moving. Who knows? But this is an interesting experiment. I'm actually I'm intrigued by this. You could do one of those real-time maps to show where 432 is happening throughout the world.
That would be cool.
Track it to whatever the news reports of those places might be.
See crime statistics and stuff,
right.
Health statistics, to see if there's any correlations. I mean, I know in Toronto, my old hometown, there is one subway station that had a a much higher crime rate, a lot of crime, a lot of incidents, things like that would always happen at this one particular subway station, more than any of them else. I mean, it's a big city and crime happens everywhere, but this particular subway station was very synonymous with this. So what they did was they put in. It seemed pretty experimental at the time, especially for government to do this, but they played classical music at this subway station all the time, like on repeat 24/7, even when they're closed. And go figure, probably know where I'm going with this. Crime rates completely dropped, completely and utterly dropped to a point where it's on just as much as any other subway station, if not even less, probably. And they still play it to this day. And I don't know, but that's got to be a correlation, right?
So you've seen the video, I know, on YouTube of, I think it's Joshua Bell playing in a subway station.
Mm.
So this guy is standing there. Of course, there's hidden cameras, whatever, to capture it. He's standing there playing a Stradivarius, some of those complicated classical music in the world, and people just are walking right by.
Mm-hmm.
But without fail, at least in the video, the kids were the ones who stopped. So I don't know what the future for classical music looks like, man. But if one of the world's greatest violinists can stand in public playing one of the world's greatest violins with some of the world's greatest music, and it's ho-hum to everybody, we've got some work to do, man. There's an educational component here that is missing, right?
Yeah.
And not a granular one, just one that's an awareness one. You know, like people are aware of cancer thanks to the cancer NGOs, and so that helps, promote fundraising and blah blah blah. But if there was some awareness of music's power outside of the esoteric, I mean, we're talking pretty esoteric stuff here. 432 versus 440 hertz. I mean, that's a conversation that musicians can have, but the rest of the world. So there's awareness that we need to pump into that somehow to say, hey, I don't care what you listen to, jazz, death metal, whatever, but try 432.
Give it a try.
Maybe that's our campaign, and see what happens.
I mean, that's like, because we know now, like we know with quantum mechanics that this isn't just esoteric, total jibber jabber, because it was for a long time. And, we do actually have more and more science every day coming out to actually bring far more credence to these theories and these ideas that, once again, are extremely ancient, have been around a long, 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 long time. We're just rediscovering the science that actually proves these things. Yeah. And so, it is going to be becoming, I think, a lot more accessible and knowledgeable for people because we're understanding who we are and what, even makes up our own reality, which is vibration, and people say, one of the things I always tell people that, when I start to talk about this stuff, the dinner table or whatever, especially with like, my friends or family or whoever it is, they'll be like, all right, well, that's great, Chris, but where's the evidence? I'm like, well, no, I mean, we actually have evidence now, like quantum mechanics proves that everything is in a state of vibration. Yeah. Okay. Music is obviously vibration affecting our cells in our body, but then even more so, like what happens when someone walks, you meet someone for the first time, and when you talk about that person afterwards, a lot of people will say this, but like, oh, I liked his vibe, or I liked her vibe.
Right.
You know what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Vibration. You're talking about the vibration
yeah,
that emanates from all of us, because we all have frequencies coming at us, coming out of us, and because everything is frequency. So we're literally even acknowledging that the way we feel about someone is in reference to a particular frequency. It was a positive vibration, negative vibration. I went into this really nice cafe, had a great vibe, had a great vibration.
Yeah.
This isn't chance. This isn't just a random word we throw out. There's a reason we say that,
There's a real intent there. And seeking that out. When my wife and I fell in love, it was one of those instantaneous things. And I don't know how science explains that. Maybe it's an electromagnetic sync, but it's definitely a sync, right? And that happens before you even touch. There's some connection that takes place. And some people say they see it in their eyes. Eyes are the windows of the soul, whatever. Mm. But I think it's more fundamental. And the vibe, I think, is where it is. There's a synchronicity between vibrational energy that is it's like the where are they waves, where if you get waves syncing up, they peak higher, right? And the troughs peak lower, that you get a bigger amplitude out of that.
And it's resonance.
And it's resonance. It's just resonance. It's just resonance. This is some spectrum of electromagnetic or vibrational energy that ranges from, the vibration of the earth, which is, I don't know what, it's really slow.
I forget what it's like 7 hertz or something, I think.
Yeah, it's like from all the way to ultraviolet light or whatever on the very far end. And X-rays and stuff we can't even, it's vibration, right? It's out there. And wouldn't it be great to hear all of that?
I know. Well, maybe that's what happens when you leave this physical plane, when you pass on and leave this body, and maybe that's when you're able to get out of. Because again, our body is limited with what it can perceive in terms of frequency. That's why psychedelics are so interesting, because they open up a lot of that. But even still, like, when you exit this vessel, perhaps maybe that's when you hear the beauty of like the whole universe, and maybe that's actually that's why people who have these near-death experiences come back and say like, "Oh, I was so much nicer on the other
much
side."
better. Well, maybe the Big Bang is actually still happening. The echoes of that are available if we were able to measure them or hear them or experience them in some way. I mean, I feel like that when strange feelings come over you, it's like you get that spine tingling thing, ASMR, whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Something's happening there, and it's usually not from a stimulus that it's just like, wow. I mean, if you can practice it, tying it into things, but it's so much fun when it catches you by surprise.
That's incredible. And one thing that just popped into my head, maybe like one of the last thoughts I have here on this tuning and frequency and whatnot with our bodies, is we got to remember too that this is all very, very standard science. Like everything that we've really been talking
this is all basic stuff.
We can say it's esoteric because it feels esoteric when we're talking about it. And maybe when we dabble into the spirituality, it gets there. But a lot of what we said today is all very, very scientific. And I encourage everyone to please do as much research as you can and let us know if you find anything else. But we got to remember that science tells us that we are 99.9% empty space. What is matter? Matter, we call matter things that are made of molecules and atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons. Well, when you look at all that on the quantum level, there's so much space in those things that we consider our matter, what make up the physical
solid
world. Right. So it makes so much sense that if we're really just basically particles of energy floating around that in this third dimension kind of congregate to form some form of matter, solid, whatever you want to call it, us, then that's what we're seeing right now. So we're not really even seeing physical objects. We're seeing bits of energy that have congregated to form these different colors and shapes and anatomy and et cetera, and very complicated variations. So it makes perfect sense that sound, once again, vibrational therapy, things of that nature, go and they literally physiologically shift you because you already are that vibration and that series of energy all like gone together. So if you put different frequencies that resonate in different ways with those cells, like you can change anything in theory, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
Endless possibilities.
And I don't mind the differentiation, just like, an atom is differentiated by its particles. I don't mind the differentiation so much between like all the humans on the planet or all the fish on the planet. Whether differentiation is useful, right? And once you are aware that you're just a differentiated form of matter that everything else is made of too, all of a sudden the connection happens, right? And you go, oh yeah, I'm just this bag of atoms. Chris is that bag of atoms, and here we are communicating by vibration, right?
Yeah,
that's how we actually manage to get along in this world. Voice, sight, touch, whatever. It's all just vibration. And what a marvelous thing to find that commonality together with like everybody else who's around you, and to appreciate the diversity of it. There's a whole subject, but at the end of the day, we're all doing pretty well for differentiated atoms.
Yeah, we are.
All things considered, we've gone this far. How long has it been? 4.5 billion years, something like that. The Earth has been around.
A lot amount of time. Yeah,
and we're a couple 100,000 of that, and it's not too bad. We did things like the pyramids.
Pretty cool.
Or something happened, right? And we've got this technology, and Tesla came along, so there's cool things happening.
Oh yeah,
considered.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not too concerned about the conflict. Okay, so if Big Pharma tries to shut down rife frequencies, so what? People are still going to find them. They're still going to use them. We have the internet. We can find anything now. And do your research, find out where you can play around with stuff and see if it's helpful. If it is, then use that.
There's so much stuff, and what I love about music is it is that universal language. Like that's probably why everyone, with all of our differences, and which make us really awesome. I wouldn't want to be in a world where we're all the same. It's boring.
Yeah.
Like I like variation. And so when we come together at a concert, and you got every walk of life there. That's because we're coming together for the music, because it's that universal language that every soul resonates with, every body, you know what I mean? It's all vibration. It's all that. It's a common language. It's a universal language. So maybe that's why we love it.
We need to hear. I mean, it's the tree falling in the forest thing, right? But I think we need to hear. And certainly as musicians, we get this. Like, it's much better to play for a room full of people who get it than for an empty room.
Yeah.
Right. With the exception of the Great Pyramids.
Sure.
That would be an empty room that'd be cool to play in.
Yes. And I might go out of my body playing there. So
so there you go. So you wouldn't even be there anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like this ability to connect around something that's so powerful and so fundamental to who we are is a huge responsibility, Chris. I take it pretty seriously. You know, sitting down and playing a note in the middle of Balboa Park, and most of the time it's just the ducks who are listening, right? But it doesn't matter.
But they love it.
You know? They do. I had a couple come and like sleep next to the keyboard.
Oh my God.
It's the weirdest dang thing. And you've seen the videos, but you know, that responsibility of offering sound is huge and very profound.
Well, that's why I love these talks, because it gets me pumped for everything I'm doing in the week, you know, with my music, getting that moving forward and helping more people. And just, you know, it really is all about that. It's for the love of it. And it's for also the real need and honestly a sense of urgency that I feel right now, just to get this out to the masses as much as possible, because, you know, everyone can heal themselves through just picking up an instrument and strumming along or playing along and singing along. You don't even need an instrument. Just use your voice.
Clapping, beating, beatboxing.
Anything. Yeah. Whatever it is, anything.
Do it.
If you just do it intentionally. And so, let's spread that virus. I'm down with that one. You know, like let's
absolutely. It's highly contagious, a whole lot of fun, very healthy, and golly, safe.
Yeah, safe as it gets. As safe as it gets. You know,
just don't blow out your eardrums if you. And
yes, like me at the concerts every summer. Basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do that.
Get ear protection. You'll enjoy it just as much. I use them, and I do. So
yes.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation, and for taking time to show your appreciation with a like, share, or subscribe. Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness is a practice of spontaneity, and we welcome your comments, ideas, and questions. There are ways to connect with us in the show notes, so let us hear from you. Until next time, this is Bill Protzman along with Chris Noble wishing you great musical health. Samara Huchaya.